Former President Jacob Zuma has thrown a hand grenade into the South African 2024 election and ANC politics. What does his recent announcement mean? How do we make sense of it? What is its importance for the election? And what is its importance for the ANC politics? Wise, masterful chess move or desperate attempt to gain relevance? Let's get into it. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. If you're new around here, my name is Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and on this channel, the Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh Experience, we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. Now, it's mid-December, my crew is on holiday, but as usual, South Africa is a movie, so I thought I'd just jump in and do this emergency episode on Jacob Zuma's recent announcement. Drop me a comment in the comments below if you think these kind of emergency episodes, maybe they don't have all the bells and whistles and the crew and camera and lights, but we can do these quick episodes. So drop me a comment if you want me to do more of these. So in today's episode, I want to look at a couple of things. The first thing I want to look at is what exactly did Jacob Zuma announce? Because you have to actually think very carefully about what he said. It's not obvious what he said, and we need to delve into exactly what his announcement was about. Secondly, and after that, I want to look at what the impact of this will be on the 2024 election. Will this be a game changer for the election? Will it have no impact? That's the question we're going to tackle. I also want to look at what the impact of this will be on the ANC, thirdly, and its internal politics. And then fourthly and finally, I put out a tweet, which I'll link to in the description below, where I asked for your assessment, and I want to pick out some highlights of your comments on social media on X so that we can check what you've been saying as well, and I'll respond to some of your reactions to my tweet. So let's get straight into it. Item number one is, what did former President Jacob Zuma actually announce? Now, in Soweto, in mid-December, whenever you're watching this on a Saturday, former President Jacob Zuma made a massive announcement that effectively he is withdrawing his support for the ANC in the 2024 election. Now, this follows on the heels of a number of senior ANC members either distancing themselves from the party, semi-distancing themselves, or refusing to campaign for the party. But Zuma didn't just say he was withdrawing his support for this election campaign. He said that he had given his support to a new political party which has just been formed and registered, called Umkhonto weSizwe. Now, interestingly, confusingly, or in some ways strategically, and we'll get into this, he also said that he considers himself still to be a member of the ANC and that he will die in the ANC. And that this Umkhonto weSizwe party is a vehicle to rescue the ANC rather than to destroy the ANC. So what Zuma is doing here is two things, and there are two sides to this coin that we need to consider. Firstly, the reason why I think this is a strategic move is because Zuma is targeting ANC supporters specifically. And we're going to get into this more in part 2 when we look at the 2024 impact. He's targeting those people who don't want to vote for other political parties, who don't see themselves in the EFF or the DA or the IFP or Action SA or any other party. And he's saying to them, I'm going to build a vehicle where even if you're an ANC supporter, but you don't like what the ANC is doing, you can lend your support to that vehicle to send a message to the ANC. And that's an interesting move. What it also does, on the reverse side of that coin, is it doesn't appeal very much to people who are tired of the ANC, gutful of the ANC, and who want to see the ANC gone, because they would have preferred Zuma to just say, I'm leaving this party once and for all. So he's kind of played an interesting game here where he said he's withdrawing his support from the ANC. He is targeting ANC voters particularly and trying to weaken the party by honing in on the ANC specifically. He hasn't necessarily lent his support to other opposition parties, although he did foreshadow that he thinks after 2024 there could be what he called a patriotic alliance of forces that could be on the so-called left of the political spectrum. And one would assume that would include the EFF, the ATM, the UDM, the Pan-Africanist Congress. So I think it's interesting to pay attention to what he did there. And so there's a new party, but the second key part of his message is that this new party is supposed to rescue the ANC and return it to its true self. So the second thing he did is he positioned Cyril Ramaphosa's ANC as not the real ANC. And this seems to be the overall message that this party will run with into 2024, that there is a real ANC that is actually represented by the likes of Zuma and his Mkhonto weSizwe party. And there's a fake ANC which has in some ways taken over the brand of the ANC, but it's not the real ANC. And so you might believe in the ANC, but just because it has the party regalia doesn't mean it's the actual liberation movement that the ANC used to be. So Zuma's trying to draw this distinction between a true liberation movement called the ANC, which is not the ANC right now, because it's been taken over by President Ramaphosa and white monopoly capital, according to Zuma. So you need to build a new structure which will be the real ANC, which will kind of either put pressure on the current ANC or retake over the ANC in due course. And that remains unclear exactly what the strategy is to recreate the real ANC. So what has Zuma done in a nutshell? On the one hand, he's played an interesting move by, on the one hand, withdrawing his support from the party, but saying he's still a member and therefore targeting members of the ANC who don't see themselves in other parties. And he's also said that the current ANC does not represent the real ANC. And there were some really strong statements made about how he believes that the current leadership of the ANC has sold out, that the current leadership of the ANC is somehow backed by external forces that have effectively bought the party. And of course, he really targeted the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa, saying that he has effectively taken the ANC away from itself. So that's an understanding really of what Zuma announced yesterday. We'll interrogate this and weigh it up as we proceed through the video, but let's go down to the second part of this video, which is what will the impact be on the 2024 election? And I think this is a really fascinating part of our conversation. So what impact will this have on the 2024 election? Now, I think it's important to firstly just appreciate that this is not going to be some kind of rival to the ANC. The Mkhonto weSizwe party is not going to emerge from nowhere 5 months before the election and get 50% of the vote. So anyone who thinks that, let me disabuse you of that illusion right now, and I think President Zuma knows that full well. However, so on the one hand, this is not going to be some kind of major electoral rival. I don't think it will rival the ANC. I don't think it will rival the DA or the EFF in terms of the number of votes it's able to gain. I really see this being able to gain, somewhere around the 1-2% maximum mark if massive resources are poured into this project, right? However, just because this party will not be one of the biggest rivals or one of the big three political parties, for example, in the 2024 election does not mean that it will not have a massive impact on South African politics. And in order to understand this, to understand the impact on 2024 as a whole, we first need to understand why this move could have a tremendous impact over the politics of KwaZulu-Natal and a spillover effect onto the national picture, which could be very worrying for the African National Congress. So let's look into that. And in order to do that, we need to look at some numbers. So firstly, in the last national election in 2019, the ANC plummeted in KZN from somewhere in the early 60s, I think it was between 63 and 65, all the way down to 54%. So it clung on to a majority, but it really fell very far. And you need to read that in the context of the fact that that was the first election where President Jacob Zuma was not the face of the ANC's electoral campaign. So historically, when Zuma has been the face of the ANC campaign, especially in KZN, we've seen dramatic increases in ANC support, going from the early 50s all the way up to the mid 60s in the 2 elections where Jacob Zuma was at the helm of the ANC. So he dramatically increased the number of ANC voters, nearly 1 million new voters, somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million in different elections. So Jacob Zuma knows the politics of KZN. He's also a very popular figure in KZN. I watched an interview with the head of the Social Research Foundation in which they looked at approval ratings of politicians. And if you look at the approval rating of Jacob Zuma in KwaZulu-Natal, he's by far the most popular politician, outstripping and outwinging Ramaphosa, Malema, Steenhuisen, Hlabisa by a long, long margin. Now, does that mean that people will vote for him? That still remains to be seen, because you can like someone, but it doesn't mean you'll vote for them. But I think we do have a significant raft of evidence which shows that former President Jacob Zuma is a popular figure who has in the past affected electoral outcomes, both increasing the vote when he was the face of a campaign and decreasing the vote when he wasn't the face of an ANC campaign. So what this means is that in KZN, the ANC, which is already in a very worrying position, if we just take the 2019 numbers, is really significantly at threat of not just losing that province, but losing badly in that province. Now, why do I say that? Let's go one level deeper. Because if you take the local government elections in 2021, and you look at all the votes in KZN. Now, appreciate that in a local election, there's no provincial vote. So it's not an exact science. But if we take all the votes that were cast for local municipalities within KZN, we saw that the ANC again plummeted to 41% of the total votes, right? Remember, it was at 65 in other national elections. So the ANC's got to be very worried if it looks at the aggregate number of votes it got in the local elections in KZN, which takes it well below 40 and means that it could well lose power. Now, add on top of that some of the polls that have recently come out. We look at the Ipsos poll in November 2023 and get a load of this. The ANC is sitting at 22% of that poll. Now, what's also fascinating about that poll is the number of people who refused to declare their allegiance or who are undecided, and that number is around 19-20%, which is very different from other provinces. So there's a 20% cohort in KZN who either refuse to declare who they're going to vote for or who are undecided. And the ANC currently sits at 22% of people who have declared they're going to vote for the ANC in this Ipsos poll. So the reason why the Zuma declaration is a game changer in KZN politics is because he is honing in and targeting that segment of people who are going to vote for the ANC, but also this group of 20% who are undecided or refuse to declare. And one would assume that many of those are ANC voters because in the local government election, the ANC got 41%, which is around 20% plus 22%, 42%. So one would assume that all those voters are ANC voters, one might assume, who are moving away from the party, but they're not sure yet. And Zuma has struck an arrow into the heart of that problem for the ANC and KZN. So what that means is that the ANC is seriously in danger in KZN of falling below 50%, but falling quite dramatically below 50%, and maybe even doing worse than it did in the local government elections in KZN, where it was at 41, maybe even coming below 40%. Now, that's significant for the national picture for a deeper reason. And that's because KZN because of the size of the province and the number of people, I think it's the second largest province in South Africa and the second largest group of voters. Whatever happens in KZN has spillover effects onto the national picture just because of KZN's size, right? So if 1 million people are swinging one way or another and you have 10 million voters, that's 10%. So the ANC, in losing each percent it loses in KZN, is proportionately larger than in other provinces because of KZN's size. So if the ANC loses 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 votes because of what Zuma has said, that is going to have an impact on the 2024 picture, and it will be one of the key contributing factors which takes the ANC nationally below that 50% mark, if that happens. Now let's just take a step back, because in a series of polls done recently, and I did a whole video on this, so check my channel for the video called Will the ANC Fall Below 50? The ANC currently sits at 43% when you average all the polls out. Now, this Zuma announcement can only push the ANC one way, and that's further downward. So I think in terms of the national picture, there's still a debate as to whether the ANC will get below 50 because it has a tremendous electoral machinery. Opposition parties aren't necessarily exciting imaginations like they could. But I think the Zuma question really now, because of the amount of KZN votes that could swing away from the ANC, really will affect that national total and would point towards an argument saying that the ANC will come below 50. They were below 50 before this announcement. It's hard to see how this announcement would help them. And certainly there are many ways one could see that this would hinder them. So I think this means ANC below 50 becomes an even more likely prospect. Of course, look out for the polls that will come out in January, and we'll do a reassessment of where the election stands. But that would be my overall take on what this means for 2024. In other provinces, I think it will probably have a minimal impact. You could see some traction in Gauteng, but outside of that, it's hard to see how this new party with so little time will affect tremendously the vote in other provinces. But I do think it will have a major effect in KZN. If the Mkhonto weSizwe party plays its cards right, campaigns hard and finds resources, I think Zuma can be an electoral asset in KZN like no one else. So having said that, let me come on now to how this could affect the internal politics of the ANC. Now, what we recently saw was another ANC veteran, roughly the same age as Jacob Zuma, Mr. Mavuso Msimang, resigning from the party and then retracting his resignation. Yay! I didn't know rescissions also applied to resignations. South Africa remains a three-part series. So what I think is interesting about that, though, is that for the ANC, they really have this deep problem of people on both sides of the party, both flanks of the party, withdrawing their support. So if you look at Jacob Zuma, he represents one wing of the party, let's say a kind of pro-Zuma wing, a pro-radical economic transformation wing. And on the other hand, you have what used to be an anti-Zuma wing of the party when he was still the leader, of which Mavuso Msimang was a very outspoken proponent. Now, what's interesting to me is that these two diametrically opposed parts of the ANC, because the party is a broad church, are both abandoning the party, or are both withdrawing their support from the party, or to some extent are not lending their full support to the party like they used to. So yes, Mavuso Msimang may have withdrawn his resignation, but a lot of his statements are going to still have a serious effect. When you have a veteran saying, they've lost confidence in the party, that has a serious effect. It was all over the media. Now, the retraction of the resignation may dampen that effect, but it's still going to be there. And then you have Zuma, on the other hand, also saying he's lost support from the party. So even though a Mavuso Msimang and a Jacob Zuma speak to different constituencies, it's interesting that both of those constituencies are withdrawing their support, or at the very least not lending their full support to the ANC's electoral campaign. And the ANC needs every last drop of support it can get in order to make this a successful election and cling on to its 50%. So I think the ANC is currently struggling with a serious possible exodus. And what they're trying to do, and I must say they pulled a rabbit out of the hat with Mavuso Msimang's retraction of his resignation, which I think really damaged Mavuso Msimang in terms of coming out one week and saying something and then the next week retracting that, which never looks good. But what the ANC needs to avoid, and what they will be hoping they can avoid, is a snowball effect where one veteran comes out and resigns and another comes out and resigns. Roger Jardine with his new party used to be a strong supporter of the ANC. And a snowball effect starts building. Jacob Zuma, Thabo Mbeki, where a lot of senior, respected voices who attract different constituencies start withdrawing their endorsement of the party in this campaign. Now, the ANC, of course, will be keen to downplay all of this, but I think it will cause internal worry in the party. The other thing is that the ANC had two objectives after Nasrec won in 2017. It was unity and it was renewal. And this does not look good for unity, because more and more people are starting to vocalize their disapproval, and the party is not just fractured, but people are actually fully leaving the party. Now, unity is important for an election because you need to sing from one hymn sheet. On the other hand, I don't think we should downplay the fact that this will galvanize Cyril Ramaphosa's close circle, and it will mean that they feel besieged. They might take on a siege mentality and say, you know what, a lot of people are criticizing us. To hell with them. We are going to still push through this message, and we are going to show people that it's the ANC that matters and not individuals. And so we will see a very defensive ANC that is fighting for its life. And what does that mean? For the first time, we're going to see the ANC really criticizing one of its own, because I predict we will see major criticism of Jacob Zuma, ironically coming from the ANC, the party that defended him when so many in the country were criticizing him. We're going to see a legal strategy, as we've seen, to try and take this Umkhonto weSizwe name away from Jacob Zuma. We're going to see public statements which are going to be castigating of Jacob Zuma. We're going to see a political strategy, which I've already started seeing coming from alliance partners like COSATU, basically attacking Jacob Zuma. And we'll see what that does, because when the ANC's machinery, weakened as it is, starts coming for someone, they can do a lot of damage. But at the same time, Jacob Zuma will fight back, and he'll have some strategies of his own. And he, for the first time, he says next year, is going to reveal. Now, he's been promising us some reveals for a long time. Check out my interview with Jacob Zuma on this channel. We've interviewed so many different people, Helen Ziller, Jacob Zuma. Check out all of our interviews if this is the first time you're watching. He says he's going to reveal some things that could also be very damaging to the ANC. Now, what we can't rule out, and I'll end here on the ANC part, because I also want to come to some of your social media comments. We can't rule out that the ANC might try to do with President Zuma what they did with Mavuso Msimang. The ANC knows how to get people into a room, negotiate with them, and come up with some kind of amicable solution behind closed doors. We saw that with Ezulwini Investments. They're now in a backroom negotiation about this 150 million rand debt. Check out that video that I did on that. They obviously took Mavuso Msimang aside, tried to talk to him, and somehow extracted a dramatic U-turn from him. So don't rule out the fact that the ANC will continue to try and work on former President Zuma. They will send diplomats underground via secret channels, and they will try to reason with him and persuade him behind closed doors to come back into the fold. And let's see what happens, because I've learned you can't trust ANC veterans. They love the party so much. They've been in it for 60 years that we saw with Mavuso Msimang, they can change their minds. And I think it's interesting that former President Zuma has not taken the full plunge and said, I'm out of the ANC, goodbye. He said, I still believe in this party, but I think it needs to be rescued by these extreme other means. So let's see what happens there. I would keep an eye, and I think there will still be twists and turns. I know the ANC is going to try to get Zuma to recant, but let's see. I'm sure Zuma's also thought deeply about this going forward. What will also be interesting to see is who comes to back Zuma in the new year, what allegations he will... Comment down below. What do you think Zuma is going to reveal? Because he's promised us this big reveal for many, many years. What will he reveal that could damage the ANC? That's an interesting question. Okay, in the final part of this emergency episode, I want to come to some of your responses on social media. So I asked, what do you think will be the impact of Jacob Zuma's announcement? Former President Zuma, and Stefan Kawane said, the decision won't have any significant impact on the ANC's performance next year. Pres Zuma seeks relevance and his MK relevance has long lapsed. So that's one view, is that it's very hard to convert into votes. You can be a liked person, you can be someone who's on the media, but that conversion into political party has shown people flames before. So the only thing is that President Zuma knows that. So he's been at the helm of ANC election campaigns, so he understands how ANC campaigns work. So it'll be interesting to see. Stefan, obviously, my analysis slightly disagrees with that, but I think you represent a very interesting perspective. Fezek Agwai says, the ANC needs each and every vote it can get. So even a few hundred members who follow him, it will make an impact on the ANC. Already now they are on the back foot regarding Mavuso Msimang and Praveen's SAA issue. Now they are forced to occupy themselves with MK. I think that's spot on. The ANC cannot afford any more distractions. They have their hands full already. Now this new MK headache, I wouldn't want to be a Luthuli House strategist finding my way through this. And then finally, Mlegeleli Ngongo says, unlike the pronouncement by Thabo Mbeki, which spoke to the upper middle class, this pronouncement speaks to the multitude of the lower middle and the working class. It strengthens the support for parties such as the EFF, ATM, ACT, and Umkhonto weSizwe, while it certifies the end of the ANC. Well, let's see, Mlegeleli. I think that you're quite right, and I did allude to the way that you've got Thabo Mbeki not giving full support, being ambiguous. You've got former President Zuma on the other hand. You've got veterans coming out supporting new parties. Zakal. So yeah, that's it for today's emergency episode of SMWX. What other content on this channel, if you're new around here, could be relevant to this? Well, as I alluded, we have over 250 videos. So do your December binge and understand South African politics in all new depth by looking around on our channel. We did an episode about will the ANC fall below 50%, where we look deeply into the recent polls. So definitely have a look at that episode. We just are going to release an episode with the ANC Youth League's Colin Malachi. Have a look at that to get your perspective on what the ANC and the Youth League is thinking. This channel is not about pushing the agenda of one party or one perspective. We interview a range of different people, and we trust that our audience is wise enough and smart enough to make up their own minds. Also have a look at my interview with Lukhona Mnguni, because that's an attempt to understand South Africa's political landscape at the moment. So thank you so much for joining us on SMWX for this emergency episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a wonderful festive season. We have you locked. We have shot a whole bunch of content that is going to roll out over the festive period. So make sure you like, you share, you subscribe. How can you support the channel? You can buy this book, which I've written, the New Apartheid, one of the best-selling books in South Africa over the last few years. A great Christmas present or festive period present for anyone who's interested in South African politics. You can become a member of this channel, and when you become a member, you get early access to videos. That's just the book saying that you should buy it one more time. Let's put it down this way. You can become a member of this channel, and then you get early access to videos. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and keep it locked on SMWX, the Sizwe Mpofu Walsh Experience. We're also on a podcast, so search SMWX podcast if you want to check it out there. Did you enjoy this emergency format? Let me know down in the comments, and let's have a conversation down there. Aye.